Ahoy there! Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another ship fitting guide for EVE Echoes. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at an old favourite ship of mine, one that I've not flown in quite some time, the Minmatar Republic's Rupture. Now, this cruiser is a firm favourite of mine in the looks department. It looks exactly how I would imagine, and I've mentioned this in the past, it looks exactly how I would imagine a space pirate galleon to look. It's just really badass, and it's a surprisingly powerful ship. Now, some of you folks have really been enjoying the fact that I'm going back over some of the older hulls with fresh eyes, like I've done with the Hurricane and a couple of other hulls recently, so I wanted to do the same here with the Rupture, especially since I've been talking to Zyklon, now of GenFed, who is a renowned Rupture pilot, about some PvP fits and things like that you can run with this, and I've been having fun with. So I wanted to talk about getting started with the Rupture today, what you would look at it in regards to a new pilot reaching Tech 6 for the first time, and comparing it to the Stabber Fleet issue, and then we're going to have a look at how you can then use this and why you'd want to keep flying a Rupture even once you're a Tech 10 equipped pilot, because this is a surprisingly badass ship. Anyway, if you are enjoying this video, this type of content, please let me know. Comment down below, hit like on the video, it really helps us out, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. There's also a Patreon page and a Redbubble merchandise store where you can check out if you really want to help support this channel by going the extra mile there. Anyway, with all of that said and done then, let's talk about the Minmatar Republic's Rupture. First of all then, let's jump into the Minmatar Republic ship tree, where we can have a look at all of the different types of Rupture available to prospective pilots. Before we go straight off into the Rupture though, I have to assume that if you're looking at the Rupture as a new Tech 6 pilot, it's because you've probably come from flying the Stabber or the Stabber Trainer early on in the game. You've been looking at medium cannon cruisers, quite enjoying these, and now you're considering where to go once you hit Tech level 6, because we have the Stabber Fleet issue, we have the Rupture, and we have the Rupture Trainer, all of which are medium cannon cruisers. So let's pause and have a brief look at this sort of question first of all, and we're going to start off with the difference between the Rupture and the Rupture Trainer, because I think that's an important thing that we talk about and get out of the way quickly. Now, the Rupture Trainer is a bit of an artifact from a bygone era of EVE Echoes, back when the only ships that could be insured were ships that had Trainer or Prototype in the name, and even then they were done directly on sort of like a standard ticket operation system. Now, the Rupture Trainer therefore could be brought back using these tickets, therefore it was one of those ships you bought it once and never had to worry about it again. It's also worth noting that, like other ships with Trainer in the name, it is sold by the game on the market as well. Those prices are set. You'll see that no one is making Rupture Trainers. There is no way for an industrialist to build a Rupture Trainer, only a Rupture. The downside of this is that nowadays the actual Rupture is cheaper than the Rupture Trainer. Although I say downside, it's not really a downside, is it? You're getting a Rupture cheaper than we used to be getting the Trainer variant for. If we're looking at its stats as well, you'll notice the Rupture Trainer only has 4 low slots, whereas the Rupture has 5. The medium cannon activation time bonus is only a 2% reduction on the Trainer, whereas it's a 5% reduction on the standard hull, and even the rest of the stats. You can see the overall defense of the Trainer is considerably lower than the standard Rupture, etc. So basically what I'm saying here is we can ignore the Rupture Trainer, pretend that ship does not exist. Now, assuming that you've been flying Stabbers or the Stabber Trainer and you're now hitting Tech level 6 and trying to decide which cruiser to go into, basically your options are the Stabber Fleet issue or the Rupture. On the left, the Stabber Fleet issue with 5 high slots has higher firepower than the Rupture only having 4. It gets more mid slots, 3 of them compared to the Rupture only having 2, but the Fleet issue Stabber only has 4 low slots, whereas the Rupture has 5. This means that the Rupture is going to be a more tanky vessel, because you're going to be able to fit more of the low slot shield modules, things like shield boosters, shield extenders, shield hardeners, that kind of thing, adaptive invulnerability fields. Whereas the Stabber Fleet issue, by the time you've put a prop mod on there, you've only got 3 slots left. It's going to be a much more fragile vessel. This is also sort of backed up there by the fact that the Rupture gets bonuses to its shield, whereas the Stabber Fleet issue gets bonuses to its flight velocity and its scan resolution. Once we get down to the basic info of the actual stats here, you'll notice as well that the Rupture has a higher overall defense, higher flight velocity than the Fleet issue. It is basically a ship that is designed around its own survivability, whereas the Fleet issue Stabber is designed around sort of dealing as much damage as possible in a hit and run capacity. So that kind of gives you an idea of which of those two vessels you might be looking for. The Rupture tends to be more popular with PvE players because it is able to do higher tech content due to that survivability. It does carry quite nicely through the levels as well. So at tech level 6 you have the Rupture, which will get you started, and at tech level 7 we have the Rupture Guardian, which leans heavily into that concept of the Rupture being a tanky, survivable vessel. It swaps out some of its DPS and combat capabilities for the ability to fit shield field modules and additional bonuses there to its shield and its survivability. At tech level 8 we then get the Rupture 2 Guardian, same ship just with better stats across the board and a higher price tag. If you can fly a Rupture 2 Guardian, there's not much point flying a Rupture Guardian. This is a vessel that is going to be sitting in the centre of a fleet with a shield field module tanking for the rest of that fleet, whether it's PvE or PvP. And if you're interested to know what shield field modules are and how Guardians work, that kind of thing, there is a video in the Catskull Academy on precisely that. I'll link it on top of the screen now, so you can head through and check that one at the end of this video as well. Have a look and see what you need to know about Shield Guardians. Finally then, we don't get a Rupture until tech level 10, where it becomes the Rupture Interdictor. This is basically the Rupture Guardian, but swapping out the shield field module for the ability to fit a warp disruption field generator. Now that, when it's switched on, locks down any ship inside that bubble and stops them warping away. This means that the Rupture is designed, again, in sort of a support role to hold enemy ships in position whilst you and your fleet rip them to shreds. With only 3 high slots and nothing particularly high in the way of damage bonuses here, the Rupture Interdictor doesn't do all that much damage on its own, but it can hold its own in certain situations. It will quite happily chew through things like frigates and destroyers, and will take out lower tech level versions of itself. But for the most part, ultimately, what we're going to talk about for the time being here is the standard Tech 6 Rupture. So assuming you're a brand new player looking at the Rupture as your new Tech 6 Cruiser, let's talk about what this is and how it works. I'm not going to talk about its appearance. I do apologise for sort of the flashing here. This is an issue that my phone still has, and I cannot wait for it to be resolved. Anyway, moving into the attributes and fittings, the Rupture has 1 drone tube. It can launch small or medium drones. Don't stress about this. Very little of the Rupture's damage is going to come from its drones. So whether you put a small drone or a medium drone, whether it's a Caldari one or a Galente one or a Minmatar one or an Amar one, doesn't really matter. Don't stress it. Put in whatever you have to hand. I like to stick with Valkyries just because it fits the theme better. Yes, I'm that kind of pilot. We then have 4 high slots, which is a decent amount of DPS this can kick out, 2 mid slots, which doesn't give us much versatility in regards to things like propulsion, jamming, and electronic warfare, but again, it's this sort of tech level. You only get 2 or 3 maximum anyway. It's not a huge issue. We then have 5 low slots. 5 low slots gives us a lot of space and versatility in regards to shield tanking modules. We're going to want things like shield boosters, shield extenders, adaptive invulnerability fields, reactive armor, reactive shield hardeners, possibly a propulsion modifier, batteries, weapon upgrade modules. All these things can go in the low slots, and the fact that the Rupture is quite tanky means that things like shield extenders and hardeners actually work really well on this, as we'll talk about later. Being a Tech 6 ship, again, we only get 2 of each of the rigs, 2 combat and 2 engineering rigs. Don't stress it. It's enough for what we need. It's standard issue for a Tech 6 vessel. Cargo hold, what to say, 900 cubic meters, pretty nice to have. We've got a lower power grid of 629 megawatts. It's a Minmatar vessel. Minmatar vessels tend to have slightly lower power grid and capacitor than some of their alternatives, especially things like the Caldari and the Amar. That's because Caldari and Amar use weapons that take up high slot that use capacitor. We don't really have that here on Minmatar ships. Cannons do not use capacitor, so we can kind of have a lower capacitor and not stress about it too much. 2031 gigajoules with a max capacitor recharge rate of 10.2 per second. If we jump back up, though, and have a look at the stats here for defense, 13,898. I've talked about this briefly when we looked at the Stabber Fleet issue. That is its standard defense. To jump ahead briefly, you'll see that shield operation bonus gives us an additional 5% shield per level of training. So that's an additional 25% shield at full training there. On top of that 4,234 shield here, that means we're going to be going way over 5,500 just on shield hit points. Now, you could theoretically armor tank a Rupture. Most Minmatar ships will work both as a shield tank or an armor tank. It does work here on the Rupture. I wouldn't really recommend it unless you're in a position where you know you're up against just lasers. For the most part, though, you're going to be better off going with shield. And being a Minmatar vessel as well, we have low structure, 3,338. As we come further down, though, again, Minmatar vessel means high flight velocity, 288 meters per second, and a low signature radius of 90 meters. That's bigger than the Stabber fleet issue, I think, off the top of my head, but it's still pretty small for a cruiser of this size. Compare that to something like the Moa, and you'll see that this is quite a small, heavy assault cruiser. Heavy attack HAC. It does what it needs to do. It's small, it's fast, it's surprisingly agile as well. Looking at the mass and the inertia modifier, combine those together, you get pretty good agility rating. It is surprisingly fast for a ship that looks so big and bulky. Anyway, shield operation we've already talked about. We also have cruiser command. This means if you want to be moving into flying cannon cruisers, the Rupture actually makes a great entry point if you've been coming from other weapon systems, because you can, if you've come from flying something like, for example, the Caracal or the Omen, and you've decided that's not for you, you want to fly the Rupture, you can just, your cruiser command skills that you've probably already trained will carry across and give you bonuses to your medium cannon tracking speed and a reduction to medium cannon activation time. You'll get those from the cruiser skill, so you're getting those bonuses whilst you train into the cannon skills. Training cannon skills obviously is going to be useful over time because it's going to make the cannons better, but the actual bonuses directly on the ship come from sources other than medium cannon operation, medium cannon upgrade, which makes it an excellent way to sort of switch from a different weapon system if you've decided you quite fancy trying out a cannon cruiser. And that's what I really like about the Rupture. It makes an excellent starting point for cruisers in general, cannon cruisers especially. It is survivable, it's versatile, and we can have a lot of fun with this. If you've just hit tech level 6 and you're looking to fly the Rupture in PvE, for example, like running some of the news encounters and things like that, this is the kind of setup that I would strongly recommend for this. What basically makes this work is how survivable this ship can become, and this doesn't really require much in the way of any additional skills beyond what you would have around about the time of hitting tech level 6, assuming you have been training aiming for cruisers and cannons. Ultimately, everything on this ship is using meta level 6 or lower, so things like Republic Fleet medium autocannons. Of course, if you only have Mark's version of this, or things like the Jolt, then that will work nicely too. I've just gone for what I found was fairly cheap on the market to showcase, but go for what is fairly equivalent for you. Now, Republic Fleet medium autocannons have good DPS, they have good optimal range, and a decent accuracy fall-off. Well, actually, they've got terrible optimal range, but because of the massive accuracy fall-off, you can kind of ignore that and be a little bit further out of it. Here you can see the optimal range is 2.95. I find on a ship like this, if you're orbiting at 5 to 7 kilometers, you're doing almost, perfect damage anyway, and so that's strongly recommended doing if you're going into sort of Tech 6, Tech 7 anomalies for PvE, doing news encounters, doing nullsec anomalies, that kind of thing. This is what you're going to be looking at. Now, that gives us a total of 389.19 DPS on the cannons. The drone I've gone for is just a Mark V Valkyrie. Just, again, it's whatever you have available in that drone slot. It's not going to do all that much. But for the survivability side of things, I've gone for 2 up-ear medium energy Nosferatus. These are going to sap capacitor out of the rats that we're fighting and allow us to keep the rest of our ship operational. Now, an afterburner, Republic Fleet medium afterburner, allows us to keep moving, move between the different ships as we need. If you find that a ship is proving difficult to hit, turn the afterburner off for a second. See if you can blap it with your cannons, and then once it's dead, consider turning the afterburner back on. This is mainly used for sort of keeping speed and moving between things, but obviously the better your cannon skills, the better your tracking is going to be. Now, to keep up the tank and survivability, I've gone for 2 Caldari Navy Adaptive Invulnerability Fields. These are cheap. Having 2 of these running is going to ensure that your ship has very high resistances to most incoming damage, and then you'll notice I've actually gone for a Republic Fleet large shield booster here. You might not have the ability to fit a large. You might only be stuck with a medium if you're very early on in your cruiser skills, but do aim to get a large in there quickly. You'll notice that this does leave us capacitor unstable, battle, 1 minute 39, but that kind of lies to you because that's assuming that everything is on and running at the same time, which it very rarely will be. You'll find that the 2 adaptive invulnerability fields are reducing the amount of damage you take significantly to the point that you won't have to use that large shield booster often. You'll find that once you hit about 90% shield, you activate the shield booster once, you're all the way back up at 100 again, and then you just wait until you take that damage before you activate it, at which point your capacitor is recharging comfortably behind you. Now here, I've gone for a public fleet gyro stabilizer just to pull that DPS up a little bit more to help us tank through some of those anomalies quicker. Again, if you can kill things, it means you're going to be taking less damage from those things, right? So a little bit extra damage there helps us clear things faster, but if you're really worried about that capacitor, you could swap that out for something like a medium battery, assuming you have the skills in order to fit that into the power grid here. Again, I'm fairly basic on my cruiser engineering skills, but yeah, you'll find that that's how that works. For rigs, I tend to just go for a cannon collision accelerator and a burst aerator. This particular ship is actually set up for additional shield. It's giving me anti-electromagnetic resistance and just the 30% additional shield. That's because this is the same ship I use for PvP. But going for things like a burst aerator and a collision accelerator will give you more DPS over the board, and then a polycarbon engine housing and auxiliary thrusters, even if they're just the prototype versions, are probably all you're going to need for the engineering rigs in order to run this quite comfortably through Tech 6, Tech 7, even Tech 8 PvE. So good luck with that. Moving on from there though, let's have a look at a PvP fitting. I mentioned at the start of this video that we were going to have a look at why you would want to keep the Rupture after leaving Tech Level 6, and I've been talking recently with Zyklon, who used to do a lot of gate camps around the Enrail area with the likes of Silent Assassin, and I remember running through quite a few of those in various different ships and avoiding getting blown up. He's sat down and talked with me about the Rupture and how he uses this in PvP, and how he personally thinks, and Vetamune is going to get very upset when he hears me say this, that this is a better cannon cruiser for PvP than the Stabber Fleet issue. And if you've been on this channel for a while, you'll know that the Stabber Fleet issue has always been one of my favourite ships as well, so that's a pretty contentious claim, and let's see how he backs this up. So the fit that I'm showcasing here was suggested by him. I've used my own fittings, my own skills to showcase this, and I'll put up some of the kill mails that he sent me through that this fit and ship has managed in the past. Zyklon is pretty much the expert when it comes to flying Ruptures, and it's very clear when you speak to him that he has a strong passion for this particular hull. This is a PvP hunter setup, and this thing chews other cruisers. It is a bully. It takes out frigates, it takes out destroyers, it takes out other cruisers. One of the kill mails that I should have on screen now is a freaking healer, for crying out loud, a faction cruiser being taken out by a Tech 6 Minmatar Rupture. And this works basically by outcapping your opponent, similar to, I guess, how things like the Cruor and the Ashamu work, in that you sort of outcapacitor your opponent and then rip them apart on the fact that you don't really need much capacitor. He does caution against going up against ships that are notorious for using things like Nosferatus or batteries. If you think your opponent is likely to be running a battery or a heavy Nos fit, don't engage. The concept here is that you want to be able to smack their capacitor hard, and if they're going to have things that can counter that, it's probably better not going after them. So he actually mentions that even though you can take out things like Daredevils and Garmas, don't really try going up against a Cruor. And against some of the bigger battleships you can try. He's had some success against Vindicators in the past, but it's a case of whether or not you can kill it before help arrives, which with only 380 DPS is a bit of a tricky one to pull off. But hey, let's actually have a look at how this fit works. And the first part of that then is in the mid slots here with a Mark 9 large energy neutralizer. Now it's worth pointing out here that I currently have battle cruiser engineering 554, and I mention that because that affects the power grid requirement of the high slots, but I only personally have cruiser engineering of 55. I'm still currently training expert cruiser engineering. I don't actually have expert cruiser 1 yet on engineering. This does as you can see, the power grid here is very full. So for me, the actual meta levels here do matter, and I strongly recommend downloading an app like Sweet and having a look using your skills at how you can cram these modules onto a ship, and you'll be able to see whether or not you need a power grid rig, if you need a power grid 2 or power grid 3. I needed a power grid 1 for this, but you could upgrade the rigs, upgrade the fittings if I were willing to put a power grid 3 on here, but that of course does make things considerably more expensive. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. We're starting here with the large energy neutralizer. This does a lot of capacitor warfare. You can see that that is taking out 642 gigajoules of their capacitor per activation. We have a battery in the low slot as well. If I tap on that, a Republic Fleet medium capacitor battery, that is going to give us a nice big bump of capacitor that we can get 2 cycles of that neutralizer out of before we actually even have to worry about ours. So understanding how your capacitor works and understanding how to cycle your modules is going to be absolutely vital for making this build work, because you need to make sure that you are capping your opponent whilst not capping yourself. That would be a bit sad now, wouldn't it? Now, the point on this to hold the enemy in position is just an interruptive warp disruptor. You again could go for something like a Predator or a Meta level 6 or something like that. I just had an interruptive lying around, 2 points of warp jammer strength at nearly 27 kilometers away. It's pretty good for me. I'm happy with that. You're sitting there orbiting at a decent range. You're still going to be able to hold them as they try to run, and with the speed that a Rupture can pull with an afterburner, you actually can hold pace with most ships of this tech level and smaller in tonnage as well. You'll hold pace with quite a few frigates, most destroyers, and almost every other cruiser out there quite comfortably using just the Republic Fleet medium afterburner. Now ignore the flight velocity adjustment, 99% there. This is still that visual bug that we had at the time of me making this video. It's about 140 I think on there. I can't remember off the top of my head what that actually comes out to, but we're getting a good flight velocity bonus here. That means this ship moves well over 1,000 meters per second, comfortable speeds that will keep pace with most other things around this, that we're going to be hunting at here. If we then have a Republic Fleet medium shield extender, he did recommend 2 of these. I had enough power grid that I could upgrade to a Patriot medium shield extender, so I swapped through to that. This, of course, allows me to just, if I start taking damage, I can pop one of those and just wait until they're about to chew through that and then pop the second one and stay alive. And we have a Caldari Navy adaptive invulnerability field going here. This one you can actually meta level up quite comfortably. If you had a C-type going spare, you're going to make your ship more expensive to bring back with IP or whatever, but ultimately they're all 1 megawatt of power grid requirement, so you can go for a better module without worrying about whether or not it fits. Worth just paying attention to. For the high slots here though, I've only gone for Republic Fleet medium autocannons because the C-types wouldn't fit. Again, if I were willing to upgrade from a power grid rig 1 to a power grid rig 2 or 3, I could change these for C-types, but as it happens, 380.29 DPS is pretty much within the region of the kind of damage I would want to be doing anyway. I'm not sure the additional cost of a ship for PvP, that additional DPS of going to C-types would actually make much of a difference. Looking at the rigs then, for the combat side, I've gone for an anti-EM screen reinforcer and a core defense field extender. That anti-EM just means if we do get hit with something like lasers, we can stay alive a bit longer, and it's just going to pull those resistances up. And the core defense field extender just gives us an additional 30% shield, making for some very large buffer on what this ship can actually take on. In the engineering then, an ancillary power grid router. This is just so we can fit everything in. Again, you can upgrade this to a 2 or a 3 if you want to upgrade the meta level of some of those previous modules to try and cram them in. Just be aware that that is going to increase the cost of your ship. And auxiliary thrusters too. I actually had one of these lying around spare. There's no way in hell I was going to go out and buy one of these. An auxiliary thruster 1 would have been fine. Something like an SMC or a CCC would do the job here as well. Zyklon actually even mentioned things like targeting rigs and that. This is kind of a wild card slot you can do whatever you want with. For me, I had an auxiliary thruster 2 kicking around spare, so I thought, why not? Let's get some additional speed on this and keep up with whatever it is I want to chase. Now ultimately with this fit, 380.29 DPS, you can see I'm just using a standard, I think it's Mark 5 even, there we are, Mark 5 Valkyrie, because yeah, that drone of 17.62 DPS, as I said, it means nothing. 362.67 cannon DPS, our standard defense cold, before I've put anything on here, is 29,582, which for a tech level 6 ship I think is pretty monstrous, especially since I do not have hardly any levels. I've got 5.4 I think in cruiser defense upgrade by the time I've taken that to 554. That's going to be a lot more EHP there to keep this alive. Capacitor's only 1 minute 25, but again, that does kind of lie to you. Through careful battery usage, we can actually do a lot better than that. Targeting, 342mm scan resolution means we do lock on fairly quickly. Signature radius is a bit larger than I'd like. That has gone up from 90 to 104 because, of course, we're using extenders. But again, it'll do the job. Finally, navigation, cold navigation speed, 432 meters per second. And again, I just want to kind of stress the kind of kill mails that this ship can get. I've yet to get much success myself just because I've not had the time to get out there, but when I'm watching other people do it, like Zyklon, I'm happy to do a video and showcase his kills because that's impressive stuff. Like, I'm really quite impressed that a T6 Cruiser is pulling down some of these targets, and that's just really, really cool. And it gives me a ship that I can recommend and a reason to keep flying it once you've gone past tech level 6. There's definitely something to be said for the humble Rupture. I love how this ship looks, and I'm really impressed the more and more I play with it at how this ship flies. It is an excellent introduction to cannon cruisers at tech level 6. It makes an excellent stepping point if you want to learn how to be a Guardian pilot, flying things like the Rupture Guardian, the Rupture 2 Guardian, then eventually moving up to battle cruisers like the Hurricane Guardian even. It's an excellent starting point for medium cannons, for medium shields, and just having a lot of fun in general. It is a ship that is more than capable for PvE and for PvP, and for that, it earns its spot as an absolutely invaluable part of the Minmatar Republic ship tree. The fact that it looks like a pirate galleon in space as well just really seals the deal for me. The fact that when you go to warp, etc., the cannons actually pull in and close like a real-life galleon or battleship. The fact that you've got the actual sort of deck at the rear end there, the forecastle. You even have sort of a middenhead on the front there, like sticking out the front. It is just such a cool looking ship, so versatile, and I really do encourage you, if you've perhaps gone on from the Rupture and you've got one sitting around in a hangar somewhere, give it a go, take it out for a spin, give it some love, and remember how things used to be. And if you're a new player looking at the Rupture, I don't think this is one you can go wrong with. I think this is an excellent starting point for all things medium cannons. It's going to take you a long way through PvE content, and will move really nicely into something like the Hurricane, which I've recently showed will comfortably do Tech 10 encounters. So yeah, there's that too, and then from there you can move into whether you go up into like the Tornado, and then move into battleships, or whatever happens. The whole of New Eden is your oyster. And for me, I just love a ship that has that kind of versatility innate in its own hull, and versatility innate in its own sort of progression to and from it as well. So there we go. I love the Rupture. I hope you folks do too. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below, and if you've got a particular fitting you would like me to showcase in a future video, contact me, whether it's via Twitter, whether it's via Discord, heck, even if it's by the email attached to this YouTube account, then 100% that's captainbenzie@protonmail.com. You can head through, send me all your ideas there, and I will showcase them in future content. Anyway, folks, thank you for watching this one right the way to the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Otherwise, happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!